The hammer struck granite with a sharp crack that echoed across the red stone canyon, and Willa Crane knew immediately she had found something extraordinary. Her hands trembled as she brushed away centuries of dust from what appeared to be fossilized remains embedded in rock formations that should not contain any organic matter according to everything she had learned at Vassar College. The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly around her in the summer of 1883, a landscape so vast and unforgiving that her colleagues back east had called her foolish for venturing here alone. But Willa had never been one to listen to voices of caution, especially when they came from men who believed a woman's place was in a parlor rather than scrambling up canyon walls with a geological hammer and specimen bags. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of red dust across her skin. The sun blazed overhead, merciless in its intensity, and her canteen was running dangerously low. She had miscalculated the distance back to Shoshone City, a mistake that could prove fatal in this country. The town sat 15 miles northeast, a collection of wooden buildings that had sprung up when gold was discovered in the nearby hills 3 years ago. Most of the gold was gone now, but enough remained to keep a few hundred souls clinging to hope in the high desert. Willa carefully wrapped her specimen in cloth and placed it in her leather satchel. She would need to return tomorrow with proper equipment and more water. The climb down from her perch was treacherous, loose rocks skittering beneath her boots as she descended. She was perhaps 20 feet from the canyon floor when she heard the unmistakable sound of a rattlesnake's warning. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The snake was coiled on a ledge directly below her only path down, its triangular head raised and ready to strike. Willa had encountered rattlers before, but never in such a precarious position. One wrong move and she would either fall or be bitten, and both outcomes seemed equally grim. "Do not move," a voice called from below, steady and calm. Not even a breath. Willa obeyed, though every instinct screamed at her to scramble away. She could not see who had spoken, but she heard the soft scrape of boots on rock, slow and deliberate. A moment later, a man appeared in her line of vision, moving with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of someone completely at home in this harsh landscape. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that touched his collar. His clothes were simple, worn denim and a faded blue shirt, but everything about the way he moved suggested competence and strength. In his hands he carried a long stick, and he used it to gently prod the rattlesnake, encouraging it to slither away from its strategic position. The snake, irritated but uninterested in a fight, withdrew into a crevice in the rock face. The man waited a full minute before he looked up at Willa. His eyes were the color of creek stones, gray-green and startlingly clear in his tanned face. "You can come down now," he said. "But mind your footing. These rocks are treacherous." Willa descended carefully, intensely aware of his gaze tracking her progress. When her feet finally touched solid ground, her legs trembled with relief and residual fear. She turned to face her rescuer, who stood a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That was closer than I would have liked. You are welcome." He studied her with open curiosity, taking in her split riding skirt, sturdy boots, and the collection of tools hanging from her belt. "You are far from town, miss. These canyons are not safe for wandering." "I am not wandering," Willa replied, bristling slightly at the implication. "I am conducting geological research. I am here to study the rock formations." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. "Geological research," he repeated, as if testing the words. "You came all the way out here to look at rocks, to study them, yes?" "I am a geologist." She extended her hand in the manner her father had taught her, firm and confident. Willa Crane from New York. He looked at her outstretched hand for a moment before taking it in his own. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked hard for his living. Pierce Ashford. I run cattle in these parts. A cowboy, Willa said, unable to keep the interest from her voice. She had read about cowboys in dime novels, but this man bore little resemblance to the romanticized figures of popular fiction. He seemed quieter, more solid, with an economy of movement and speech that suggested someone who chose his words carefully. I suppose so, Pierce said. Though I prefer rancher, I have a small spread about 5 miles west of here. He glanced at the sun, which had begun its descent toward the horizon. You will not make it back to Shoshone City before dark. The trail is difficult enough in daylight. Willa followed his gaze and felt a flutter of worry in her stomach. He was right, of course. She had stayed too long, captivated by her discovery. I have a good horse, she said, though the words sounded weak even to her own ears. Where is your horse? She pointed toward a cluster of juniper trees about a quarter-mile distant. I tethered her there in the shade. Pierce nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Miss Crane, I do not mean to alarm you, but there are mountain lions in these canyons. They hunt at dusk. A woman alone, on foot with dark coming on. He did not finish the sentence, but he did not need to. Willa felt her pride war with practicality. She had promised herself she would not depend on anyone during her research expedition, that she would prove herself capable in this wild country. But she was not fool enough to ignore genuine danger when it presented itself. What do you suggest? She asked. My ranch is close, Pierce said. You could stay there tonight, set out fresh in the morning with a proper guide. My sister lives with me. She would be pleased to have another woman's company. We do not get many visitors. The offer was generous, but Willa hesitated. Her reputation was already precarious enough. A single woman traveling alone through the territories, engaging in work that most considered unsuitable for her sex. Staying overnight at a stranger's ranch, even with his sister present, could cause talk. As if reading her thoughts, Pierce said quietly, I give you my word you will be treated with complete respect. Sarah, my sister, is a good woman. She will vouch for me if you need vouching. There was something in his voice, a sincerity that cut through Willa's doubts. She looked into his steady gray-green eyes and made a decision based more on instinct than logic. Thank you, she said. I accept your offer. Relief flickered across Pierce's face, so quickly she almost missed it. Let us fetch your horse, then. We should move while there is still good light. They walked side by side through the canyon, their boots crunching on loose gravel. Willa found herself stealing glances at Pierce, intrigued by his quiet competence. He moved like someone completely at ease in this landscape, his attention constantly scanning their surroundings, alert to dangers she would never notice. How long have you lived in Wyoming? She asked, partly to fill the silence, partly because she genuinely wanted to know. All my life, Pierce replied. I was born not far from here back in '61, before Shoshone City existed, before most of the settlers came. My father was a trapper, came west from Missouri in the '50s. My mother was Shoshone. Willa glanced at him with renewed interest. That explained his appearance, the blend of features she had noticed but been too polite to comment on. Is she still living? No, she died when I was 12. Influenza. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Willa heard the old grief beneath the words. My father followed her 3 years later. Got caught in a blizzard, never made it home. Sarah and I have been on our own since then. I am sorry, Willa said, and meant it. She had lost her own mother to consumption when she was 15, knew the particular emptiness that loss created. Pierce acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. It was a long time ago. We managed. Sarah was 16, I was 15, old enough to work, young enough to adapt. They reached Willa's horse, a sturdy mare she had named Athena after the Greek goddess of wisdom. The horse nickered softly at their approach, clearly relieved to see Willa. Pierce examined the animal with an expert eye, checking her shoes and running a hand along her legs. "She is a good horse," he said approvingly. "Strong build, good feet. Where did you find her?" "I bought her in Cheyenne," Willa said. "The man selling her claimed she could handle rough country." "She has proven him right so far." Pierce untied Athena's reins and handed them to Willa. "My horse is just beyond those rocks. Wait here." He returned a moment later leading a tall bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. Like everything else about Pierce, the horse seemed solid and dependable, built for endurance rather than flash. They rode west as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Pierce set an easy pace, mindful of the rocky terrain. Willa found herself watching the landscape with new eyes, seeing it not just as geological formations to be studied but as a living, breathing space that people like Pierce called home. "What brings a geologist from New York to Wyoming?" Pierce asked after a while, his voice carrying easily in the quiet evening air. Willa smiled. It was a question she had answered many times, but she never tired of explaining. "I am studying the rock formations in this region for my dissertation. The uplift patterns here are extraordinary, and there is evidence of volcanic activity from millions of years ago. I believe the canyon systems in this area could provide crucial information about the geological history of the entire Western Territories." Pierce listened with what seemed like genuine interest. "You went to college for this?" "Vassar College, yes. I graduated last year. I am one of the first women to pursue graduate studies in geology." She tried to keep the pride from her voice but did not entirely succeed. It had been a hard-won achievement fought for against opposition from almost everyone except her father. "That is impressive," Pierce said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I have never met a woman geologist before, or any geologist for that matter." "There are not many of us," Willa admitted. "Especially women. But my father encouraged me. He is a professor of natural sciences at Columbia University. He believes that women are just as capable of scientific thinking as men, given the opportunity." He sounds like a wise man. He is, though he worried about me coming out here alone. He wanted to accompany me, but he is getting older and the journey would be hard on him. Pierce was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the horizon. "It is dangerous country for anyone alone," he said finally, "man or woman, but especially for someone not familiar with it." Willa bristled slightly. "I can take care of myself. I have been trained in wilderness survival. I know how to shoot, how to navigate, how to find water." "I do not doubt your training," Pierce said mildly, "but book knowledge and real experience are different things. You did not see that rattlesnake until it warned you. A week ago, a man was killed by a mountain lion not 10 miles from where we are now. He was a prospector who had been in these hills for 5 years. Experience is not always enough." His words were not unkind, but they stung because they were true. Willa had been so focused on the geological specimen that she had failed to watch where she was placing her hands and feet. In this country, such carelessness could be fatal. "You are right," she admitted quietly. "I was careless today. Thank you for being there." Pierce glanced at her, and she saw approval in his eyes. "Learning is not a weakness, Miss Crane. Everyone who survives out here had to learn. The difference is whether you learn from near misses or from fatal mistakes." They rode on as darkness settled over the land like a blanket. Stars began to appear, so many and so bright that Willa caught her breath. She had never seen stars like this in New York, where city lights obscured all but the brightest. "It is beautiful," she murmured, more to herself than to Pierce. "Yes," he agreed. "I have traveled to Denver a few times, seen the city lights and the crowds, but I always come back here. This is where I belong." There was something in his voice, a deep connection to the land that Willa recognized, because she felt a similar pull toward understanding it, even if her relationship was scientific rather than spiritual. The rock formations she studied were not just academic subjects to her. They were stories written in stone, histories that stretched back millions of years, and she felt privileged to be able to read them. After about an hour's ride, Pierce pointed toward a cluster of lights in the distance. "That is the ranch." As they drew closer, Willa could make out a main house, a barn, and several smaller outbuildings, all built from rough-hewn timber. It was modest but well-maintained, surrounded by fenced pastures where she could just make out the dark shapes of cattle grazing in the starlight. A woman appeared on the porch of the main house as they rode up, holding a lantern aloft. She was small and dark-haired like Pierce, with the same high cheekbones and striking eyes. "Pierce, is everything all right?" Her voice was warm but concerned. Then she noticed Willa, and her expression changed to one of surprise. "Oh, we have a guest." Pierce dismounted and moved to help Willa down, though she was perfectly capable of dismounting herself. Still, his hand on her waist was steadying after the long ride, and she was grateful for it. "Sarah, this is Miss Willa Crane from New York. She is a geologist studying the rock formations near Red Canyon. Miss Crane, this is my sister Sarah." Sarah set down her lantern and came forward with a welcoming smile, taking Willa's hands in her own. "A geologist, how wonderful. Please come inside. You must be exhausted. Pierce, tend to the horses and then come have supper." Pierce nodded and led both horses toward the barn, leaving Willa to follow Sarah into the house. The interior was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and colorful woven rugs that Willa suspected were Shoshone work. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the smell of cooking food made Willa's stomach growl, reminding her she had eaten nothing since breakfast. "Please sit," Sarah said, gesturing toward a chair near the fire. "You must tell me what brings you all the way to Wyoming. We rarely see educated women out here, and never one's pursuing such interesting work." Willa found herself warming to Sarah immediately. There was an intelligence in her eyes, and an eagerness for conversation that spoke of someone hungry for intellectual companionship. Over the next hour, while Sarah finished preparing supper and Pierce returned to wash up, Willa told her about her studies, her theories about the geological formation of the canyon systems, and her hopes for her dissertation. Sarah listened with flattering attention, asking insightful questions that revealed a sharp mind. "I wish I had been able to attend college," she said wistfully. "I love to read, to learn new things. But after our parents died, there was the ranch to run, and no money for anything beyond survival." "You must have been very young," Willa said sympathetically. 16. Pierce was 15. "It was hard at first. People said we would lose the ranch, that 2 children could not possibly manage, but we proved them wrong." Pride rang in her voice. "Pierce worked like 3 men and I did everything else. We kept every acre and even expanded." Pierce entered then, his hair damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt. "Supper ready, just about. Miss Crane, I hope you like venison stew. It is humble fare but filling." "It smells wonderful," Willa said honestly. "And please, both of you, call me Willa. Miss Crane sounds too formal for people who have shown me such kindness." Over supper, the conversation flowed easily. Willa found herself genuinely enjoying their company. Pierce spoke little, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and often laced with dry humor that made her smile. Sarah was more talkative, full of questions about life in New York, about Vassar, about everything Willa had seen and done in her 23 years. "You must think us terribly provincial," Sarah said at one point, laughing at herself. "Not at all," Willa replied firmly. "You have built a life here through your own efforts, overcome hardships I can barely imagine. That is more impressive than anything I learned in a classroom." Pierce met her eyes across the table, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding that made Willa's breath catch slightly. She looked away first, confused by the sudden warmth spreading through her chest. After supper, Sarah showed Willa to a small but clean bedroom. "It is not fancy, but the bed is comfortable and the quilts are warm. Do you have everything you need?" "More than enough, thank you. You have been so generous." Sarah smiled. "It is nice to have another woman in the house, and someone who has such fascinating stories to tell. I hope you will visit again, even after you return to Shoshone City." "I would like that," Willa said, and realized she meant it. Alone in the room, Willa stood by the small window, looking out at the star-filled sky. She thought about Pierce's quiet strength, the way he had rescued her from the rattlesnake without making her feel helpless, the respect in his eyes when she spoke about her work. She thought about Sarah's warm welcome, the comfortable feeling of sitting at their table sharing a simple meal. She had expected the West to be harsh and unwelcoming, populated by rough men who would dismiss her work and her abilities. Instead, on her first true day in the field, she had found something unexpected. People who treated her as an equal, who were interested in her ideas, who offered help without condescension. Sleep came easily, her body exhausted from the day's exertions. She dreamed of red rock canyons and gray-green eyes, of fossils embedded in stone and strong hands that moved with quiet competence. Morning arrived with a rooster's crow and the smell of coffee. Willa dressed quickly and found Sarah already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Through the window, she could see Pierce in the corral, working with a young horse that danced and snorted at the end of a long rope. "He is training that one for a ranch south of here," Sarah said, following Willa's gaze. "He has a gift with horses. They trust him." They ate breakfast together, all three of them, and then Pierce saddled both Athena and his own horse. "I will ride with you back to Shoshone City," he announced. "The trail can be tricky." Willa started to protest, then remembered her resolution to learn from yesterday's near miss. "Thank you," she said simply. The ride back took most of the morning. Pierce showed her landmarks to watch for, warned her about which canyon trails were unsafe, pointed out water sources she could rely on. He was teaching her, Willa realized, sharing his knowledge so that she could travel safely on her own. "Why are you helping me?" she asked at one point, genuinely curious. Pierce considered the question for a long moment. "Because your work is important," he said finally. "And because you are brave to pursue it, despite all the reasons you could have stayed safe in New York. People who have the courage to follow their purpose deserve support." His answer surprised her. She had expected something simpler, something about duty or basic human decency. But Pierce's response suggested he understood, on some fundamental level, what drove her. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." They reached Shoshone City by early afternoon. The town was exactly as Willa remembered from her arrival 3 days earlier. A dusty main street lined with wooden buildings, a saloon, a general store, a hotel, and a scattering of houses. It existed primarily to service the remaining mining operations and the ranches in the surrounding area. Pierce accompanied her to the hotel, a modest 2-story building where Willa had taken a room for the duration of her stay. The proprietor, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Dalton, looked Pierce up and down with narrowed eyes. "Miss Crane," she said pointedly, I hope everything has been proper." "Entirely proper, Mrs. Dalton," Willa said firmly. "Mr. Ashford rescued me from a dangerous situation and provided accommodation with his sister as chaperone. I am grateful for his assistance." Mrs. Dalton sniffed, but seemed satisfied. Pierce tipped his hat to both women and turned to leave, but Willa called after him. "Mr. Ashford, wait." She followed him out onto the wooden sidewalk. "I need to return to the canyon tomorrow to continue my work. Would you be willing to serve as my guide? I can pay you for your time." Pierce shook his head. "I do not want your money, but I will guide you if you want the company. I know those canyons better than anyone. Tomorrow morning then, early, I will be here at dawn." He tipped his hat again and mounted his horse, riding away before Willa could say anything more. She watched him go, aware of a pleasant flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with geology or rock formations. That evening, Willa organized her equipment and made detailed notes about the specimen she had found. She sketched the location, described the surrounding rock layers, and formulated theories about how organic matter might have been preserved in such an unlikely geological context. But her thoughts kept drifting to Pierce, to the quiet way he moved through the world, to the unexpected depths she sensed beneath his reserved exterior. She scolded herself for the distraction. She was here to work, to advance her research, not to develop feelings for a cowboy rancher, no matter how kind or intriguing he might be. Still, as she lay in bed that night, it was Pierce's face she saw before sleep claimed her. True to his word, Pierce arrived at the hotel just as the sun was painting the eastern sky pink and gold. Willa was waiting, dressed in her field clothes, her equipment carefully packed. They rode out together into the cool morning air. The landscape looked different in this light, softer somehow, the harsh edges gentled by the slanting rays of the rising sun. Pierce led them by a different route than Willa had taken before, one that avoided the steeper, more dangerous trails. "How did you learn so much about this country?" Willa asked as they rode. "My mother taught me," Pierce said. "She knew every canyon, every water source, every place where plants grew that could be eaten or used for medicine. She said the land would take care of us if we learned to listen to it." "You believe that?" "I do. The land provides if you pay attention, but it is not forgiving of carelessness or disrespect." They reached Red Canyon by mid-morning. Pierce helped Willa set up her equipment, then settled himself in the shade to wait while she worked. Willa was intensely aware of his presence as she climbed up to her previous position, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. The specimen was even more interesting than she had initially thought. The fossilized remains appeared to be from some kind of ancient marine creature, which made no sense given the current elevation and distance from any ocean. But the evidence was right in front of her, embedded in rock that was at least 15 million years old according to her preliminary analysis. She worked steadily through the morning, carefully extracting samples, taking measurements, making detailed sketches and notes. It was meticulous, painstaking work, but it was what she loved. Each piece of data was like a word in a story, and slowly, patiently, she was learning to read the narrative written in stone. When the sun reached its zenith, Pierce called up to her. "You should rest. Drink some water." Willa realized she was parched and exhausted. She climbed down carefully and accepted the canteen Pierce offered. They sat together in the shade, sharing dried meat and biscuits that Sarah had packed. "What did you find?" Pierce asked. Willa launched into an explanation, her enthusiasm overcoming her usual reserve. She described the fossil, the rock formations, the implications for understanding how this entire region had been transformed over millions of years. She talked about ancient seas and volcanic eruptions, about continental drift, and the slow, inexorable processes that shape the Earth. Pierce listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand. So this whole area was once underwater, millions of years ago, yes. Then the land was uplifted by tectonic forces. What was once the sea floor became mountain peaks. The fossils are evidence of that transformation. It is hard to imagine, Pierce said, looking around at the dry, rocky landscape. An ocean here where there is barely enough water for the cattle. The Earth is always changing, Willa said, just very slowly by human measures. But given enough time, deserts become oceans and oceans become mountains. Nothing is permanent. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the whisper of wind through the canyon and the distant call of a hawk. Willa found herself stealing glances at Pierce, noticing details she had missed before. The laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands moved with unconscious grace even at rest. "Why ranching?" she asked suddenly. "You could have done anything. Gone anywhere." Pierce smiled slightly. "This land is in my blood. My mother's people lived here for generations. My father chose it freely. I cannot imagine being anywhere else. The work is hard, but it is good work. Honest work. And at the end of the day, I can sit on my porch and watch the sun set over country that stretches as far as the eye can see. That is worth more than anything I might find in a city." "I understand that," Willa said. "Not the same way, perhaps, but I do understand. When I am out here, studying these rocks, learning their secrets, I feel connected to something larger than myself. Something that has existed for millions of years and will continue long after I am gone. It is humbling and exhilarating at the same time." Pierce met her eyes, and Willa felt that flutter in her stomach again, stronger this time. "You have a poet's soul under all that science, and you have a philosopher's mind under all that cowboy practicality." He laughed, a warm sound that made Willa smile in response. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Willa was not quite ready to name. They worked through the afternoon, Willa extracting samples while Pierce kept watch for dangers. As the sun began its descent, they packed up and started the ride back to Shoshone City. This time, the journey felt shorter, the conversation flowing easily between them. At the hotel, Pierce helped Willa carry her equipment inside. Mrs. Dalton watched with pursed lips but said nothing. "Same time tomorrow?" Pierce asked. "You do not have to," Willa said, though she hoped he would ignore her protest. "I am sure you have work at your ranch. Sarah can manage without me for a few days. Besides, I am curious about these ancient oceans of yours. I want to see what else you discover." "Tomorrow, then," Willa agreed, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. This became their pattern over the next 2 weeks. Each morning, Pierce would arrive at dawn, and they would ride out together to Red Canyon or one of the other sites Willa wanted to investigate. She would work while he kept watch, and at midday they would share lunch and conversation. The conversations ranged widely, from geology to ranching, from books to politics, from personal histories to hopes for the future. Willa found herself opening up to Pierce in ways she had never opened up to anyone except her father. She told him about her struggles at Vassar, about being the only woman in many of her classes, about the professors who refused to take her seriously, and the few who championed her work. She talked about her mother's death, about how it had drawn her closer to her father but left a void nothing could quite fill. Pierce, in turn, shared stories of growing up between two worlds, neither fully white nor fully Shoshone, accepted by some and rejected by others. He talked about the loneliness of it, the sense of never quite belonging anywhere. He spoke of his father's death, how he had blamed himself for not being there, for not preventing it somehow. "I was 17, he said quietly one afternoon as they sat in the shade of a massive boulder. Old enough to know that some things are beyond our control, but young enough to believe I should have been able to do something. It took me years to make peace with it. Have you made peace with it now? Willa asked gently. Mostly. There are still days when I wonder what he would think of how I have managed the ranch, whether he would be proud or disappointed. But I have learned to live with the questions. Willa reached out impulsively and took his hand. Pierce looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, and something shifted between them. The air felt charged, heavy with possibility. "Willa," he said softly, and just hearing him say her name made her heart race. But before either of them could say or do anything more, a shout echoed across the canyon. They pulled apart quickly, turning to see a rider approaching at a gallop. Pierce stood, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip, then relaxing when he recognized the rider. "It is Charlie Winters from the ranch next to mine." Charlie pulled up his horse in a spray of dust and gravel. He was young, barely 20, with a worried expression. "Pierce, thank God I found you. It is Sarah. There has been an accident." Pierce went very still. "What happened?" "A horse threw her. She is hurt bad, Pierce. Doc Murphy is with her now, but he said you should come quick." Without a word, Pierce strode to his horse and swung into the saddle. Willa was right behind him, mounting Athena with practiced speed. "You do not have to come," Pierce said, but his voice was strained, his eyes already focused on the distance between here and home. "Yes, I do," Willa said firmly. They rode hard, pushing the horses to their limits. Charlie led the way, cutting across country where Willa would never have dared to go. Her legs and back screamed in protest at the punishing pace, but she ignored the pain, focusing only on keeping up with Pierce. The ranch appeared in the distance, and Pierce urged his horse to even greater speed. They clattered into the yard, and Pierce was off his horse before it had fully stopped, running toward the house. Willa dismounted more slowly, her legs shaking. An older man emerged from the house, his face grave. He must be Doc Murphy. "How is she?" Pierce demanded. "Alive, but it is serious. She has broken several ribs, and I suspect there may be internal injuries. I have done what I can, but the next few days will tell the tale." Pierce's face went white. "Can I see her?" "She is sleeping. I gave her something for the pain, but yes, go in. She will want to know you are here." Pierce disappeared into the house. Willa stood uncertainly in the yard, unsure whether she should follow or wait. Doc Murphy noticed her and raised his eyebrows. "You are the geologist lady from town." "Yes. Willa Crane. I was with Pierce when Charlie found us." "Good. He should not be alone right now. Sarah is like a daughter to me. I helped deliver her, watched her grow up. If she does not pull through—" He shook his head, unable to finish the thought. "Is there anything I can do?" Willa asked. "Go sit with Pierce. Make sure he does not do anything foolish like blame himself. That boy has carried too much weight on his shoulders for too long." Willa entered the house quietly. She found Pierce in Sarah's room, sitting beside the bed, holding his sister's hand. Sarah looked so small and fragile lying there, her face pale against the white pillow, her breathing shallow. Willa pulled up another chair and sat beside Pierce. She did not say anything, just rested her hand on his shoulder. He reached up and covered her hand with his own, squeezing gently. They sat that way for a long time, keeping vigil as the afternoon faded into evening. Doc Murphy came and went, checking on Sarah, adjusting her position, listening to her breathing. Willa made coffee and found some cold biscuits in the kitchen. She coaxed Pierce into eating a little, though he seemed barely aware of what he was doing. As night fell, Sarah stirred and opened her eyes. "Pierce!" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I am here." Pierce leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Do not try to move. Doc Murphy says you need to rest." "The horse," Sarah murmured, "spooked at a snake. I tried to hold on." "Hush, it does not matter now, just rest." Sarah's gaze drifted to Willa. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed," Willa said. "Good, he needs someone." Sarah's eyes closed again, and her breathing evened out into the rhythms of sleep. Doc Murphy appeared in the doorway. "That is a good sign, her waking and speaking. She is a fighter, that one. Pierce, you should get some rest too. You are no good to her if you exhaust yourself." "I am not leaving her." "I did not say leave. I said rest. Lie down on that sofa, close your eyes for a few hours. Miss Crane and I will watch over her." Pierce looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. He nodded reluctantly and stood, moving like an old man. Willa followed him into the main room, where he sank onto the sofa. "She is all I have," he said quietly, staring at the dying fire. "If I lose her—" "You will not lose her," Willa said with more confidence than she felt. "She is strong and she has you. That is more than enough reason to fight." Pierce looked up at her, and in his eyes Willa saw fear and grief and something else, something that made her heart turn over in her chest. "Thank you," he said, "for staying, for being here. I know you barely know us, but having you here helps." "I am exactly where I want to be," Willa said, and realized it was true. She convinced him to lie down, then sat in the chair beside the sofa. She meant to stay awake, to keep watch, but exhaustion claimed her somewhere in the dark hours before dawn. She woke to find herself covered with a blanket, sunlight streaming through the windows. Pierce was gone from the sofa. Panic seized her for a moment, but then she heard voices from Sarah's room. She found Pierce and Doc Murphy standing over Sarah's bed. Sarah was awake, her eyes clearer than they had been the night before. "Good morning," Sarah said when she saw Willa. Her voice was stronger, though still weak. "Pierce tells me you have been here all night. Thank you. How are you feeling?" Willa asked. "Like I was trampled by a bull," Sarah said with a weak attempt at humor. "But alive. Better than the alternative." Doc Murphy nodded with satisfaction. "The fever I was worried about has not developed. If she continues to improve over the next few days, I believe she will make a full recovery. It will take time, but she is young and healthy." The relief on Pierce's face was almost painful to witness. He sagged against the wall as if his legs could no longer hold him up. Willa moved to his side, steadying him with a hand on his arm. "You should eat something," she said gently. "When did you last have a real meal?" Pierce looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "I do not remember." "Come on, then. Let us see what we can find in the kitchen. Sarah needs to rest, and you need to eat." She led him to the kitchen and set about making breakfast from what she could find. She was not much of a cook, her education having focused on science rather than domestic arts, but she managed to produce edible eggs and bacon and fresh coffee. Pierce ate mechanically, but color gradually returned to his face. "I should send word to town," he said. "People will wonder where you are, and I need to check on the cattle." "The cattle can wait another day," Willa said firmly, "and I can send word to town. Right now, you need to rest." "Doctor's orders." "You sound like Sarah," Pierce said, but he smiled as he said it. Then Sarah is a wise woman. They spent the day at the ranch, both of them helping care for Sarah and managing the basic chores that needed doing. Charlie Winters returned in the afternoon with 2 other ranch hands, offering to handle the cattle until Pierce was free. It was a generous gesture that clearly touched Pierce. "People out here take care of each other," he explained to Willa. "When times are hard, neighbors become family." Over the next week, Willa found herself spending more time at the ranch than in town. She told herself it was because Sarah needed help, which was true. But she also knew it was because she could not bear to leave Pierce, to not be there to offer support and comfort. Sarah improved steadily, though she remained confined to bed. She was a terrible patient, chafing at the restriction, eager to be up and moving. But Doc Murphy was adamant, and Willa helped enforce his orders, sometimes sitting with Sarah for hours to keep her company and prevent her from trying to do too much. During those long hours, Willa and Sarah talked about everything. Sarah asked endless questions about New York, about college, about Willa's research. Willa asked about ranch life, about growing up in Wyoming, about what it was like to be of mixed heritage in a territory that was still finding its identity. "It has not been easy," Sarah admitted one afternoon. "Some people accept us, but others look down on us for having Shoshone blood. They think it makes us less than fully human. And some of the Shoshone people think we have betrayed our heritage by living like white ranchers. We exist in between, never fully belonging to either world." "That must be lonely," Willa said, "sometimes, but we have each other, Pierce and I, and we have friends who judge us by our character rather than our blood. That is enough." Sarah studied Willa with sharp eyes. "You care for him, for Pierce?" It was not a question, but Willa answered anyway. "Yes, I do. He cares for you too. I see it in the way he looks at you, the way he speaks about you. I have never seen him look at anyone that way before." Willa's heart raced. "Sarah, I am not trying to make you uncomfortable," Sarah said quickly. "I just want you to know. Pierce is the best man I know. He has spent his whole life taking care of me, of the ranch, of everyone but himself. He deserves to be happy, and I think you could make him happy." "I am only here for a few more weeks," Willa said, though the words felt like lead in her mouth. "Then I have to return to New York to complete my dissertation." "A few weeks can be enough, if you make them count," Sarah said. "Do not let fear keep you from something wonderful." That evening, after Sarah had fallen asleep, Willa found Pierce on the porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of color. She sat beside him, and for a moment they were both silent, content to watch the day fade into night. "Sarah is doing well," Willa said. "She will be back to full strength soon." "Thanks to you," Pierce said. "Having you here helping care for her has made all the difference." "I was glad to help." Pierce turned to look at her, his gray-green eyes serious. "Willa, these past weeks with you have been the best I can remember. I know you have to leave eventually, go back to your life in New York, but I need you to know what you have come to mean to me." Willa's breath caught. "Pierce, I am in love with you," he said simply. "I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you stranded on that rock face, determined and fearless despite the danger, and every day since has only made me more certain. I love your passion for your work, your brilliant mind, your kind heart. I love the way you laugh, the way you get so excited when you are explaining something about rocks that you forget everything else. I love you, Willa Crane." Tears stung Willa's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have tried not to, tried to tell myself it is impossible, but I cannot help it. I love you, Pierce Ashford." He reached for her, and she went into his arms willingly. His kiss was gentle at first, questioning, then deeper as she responded with equal fervor. Willa felt as if she were falling, but instead of fear, she felt only joy and rightness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "What do we do now?" It was the question Willa had been asking herself for days. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have to return to New York eventually. My dissertation, my father, my whole life is there." "And my life is here," Pierce said quietly. "The ranch, Sarah. Everything I know is in Wyoming." They sat together in the gathering darkness, holding each other, neither willing to voice the impossible choice that lay before them. Over the next few days, they stole moments together whenever they could. Kisses in the barn when Sarah was napping, quiet conversations on the porch after supper, long rides through the canyons where Willa continued her research with Pierce always by her side. It was bittersweet, knowing that each moment together brought them closer to the inevitable separation. Willa found herself memorizing details. The exact shade of Pierce's eyes in different lights, the feel of his hand in hers, the sound of his laugh. 2 weeks after Sarah's accident, Willa received a telegram from her father. Her supplies had arrived in Cheyenne as planned, and he was asking about her progress. The telegram was a reminder that her time in Wyoming was limited, that she had obligations and responsibilities waiting for her back east. That evening, she showed the telegram to Pierce. He read it silently, then handed it back to her. "When do you have to leave?" "I should leave within the week," Willa said, her voice breaking. "I have gathered enough samples and data to complete my dissertation. Staying longer would just be delaying the inevitable." Pierce nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" Willa turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "Because I do not understand any of this. How can I love you this much and still have to leave? How can I choose between you and everything I have worked for my whole life?" "I would never ask you to give up your work," Pierce said firmly. "Your research is important, Willa. The world needs people like you, people who are willing to pursue knowledge no matter the obstacles. I will not be the reason you abandon your dreams." "But what about us?" Pierce took her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "We will find a way. Somehow we will find a way. People have overcome bigger obstacles than distance." "Have they?" Willa asked bitterly. "I believe they have, and I believe we are strong enough to be one of them." Willa wanted desperately to believe him, but she could not see how. The distance between New York and Wyoming was not just geographical. It was a vast gulf of different worlds, different expectations, different lives. The next few days passed in a blur. Willa threw herself into organizing her samples and finalizing her notes, trying to use work as a distraction from the pain of her impending departure. But everything reminded her of Pierce. The red rocks he had helped her study, the trails he had shown her, the canyons where they had talked for hours about everything and nothing. Sarah, now well enough to move around the house though still recovering, watched them both with sad eyes. "You are really leaving," she said to Willa one morning. "I have to," Willa replied. "My work, my father, everything is waiting for me in New York. And your heart is here," Sarah said gently. "I see it in your eyes every time you look at my brother." "I do not know what to do," Willa confessed. "I have never felt this way about anyone, but I also cannot give up everything I have worked for. Is that selfish?" "It is not selfish to honor your commitments and your dreams," Sarah said, "but it is also not selfish to want love and happiness. The question is whether you can find a way to have both." "I do not see how." "Then you are not looking hard enough," Sarah said with the bluntness of someone who had nearly died and no longer had patience for wasted time. "Pierce loves you. You love him. That is rare and precious. Most people go their whole lives without finding what you two have found. Do not throw it away because the solution is not immediately obvious." Willa considered Sarah's words all day. That evening, as she and Pierce sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge, she finally voiced the idea that had been forming in her mind. "What if I came back?" she said suddenly. Pierce turned to her, hope and caution warring in his expression. "What do you mean?" "I have to return to New York to complete my dissertation and defend it. That will take several months, perhaps a year. But after that, once I have my degree, I could come back to Wyoming. I could continue my research here. There are rock formations all through this territory that no one has properly studied. I could make a career of it." "You would do that?" Pierce asked, his voice rough with emotion. "You would give up your life in New York to come back here?" "I would not be giving it up," Willa said carefully. "I would be choosing a different path. A path that includes you and Sarah and this incredible landscape that I have come to love almost as much as I love you." "What about your father?" Willa smiled sadly. "My father wants me to be happy. He would understand, and he could visit." Sarah said the trip is hard but not impossible. Pierce pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Are you certain? I do not want you to resent me someday for changing the course of your life." "You are not changing it," Willa said. "You are becoming part of it. There is a difference." "And yes, I am certain. More certain than I have been about anything except studying geology." They held each other as the stars wheeled overhead, making plans and promises. Willa would return to New York, complete her degree, and then come back to Wyoming. They would write to each other constantly. And if Willa could manage it, she might return for a visit before the year was out. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a solution. It gave them hope, something to work toward, a future to plan for. 2 days later, Pierce drove Willa into Shoshone City in his wagon, her samples and equipment carefully packed. Sarah had insisted on coming along despite Doc Murphy's protests, unable to bear the thought of saying goodbye at the ranch. At the hotel, Willa made final arrangements for shipping her specimens back to New York. She would take the stage to Cheyenne the next morning, then the train from there. That last evening, the three of them had dinner together in the hotel's small dining room. It was a quiet meal, full of meaningful glances and unspoken emotions. Afterward, Sarah tactfully excused herself, giving Willa and Pierce a final hour alone. They walked through the darkened streets of Shoshone City, neither wanting to waste a moment of their remaining time. Eventually, they found themselves at the edge of town, looking out at the vast darkness of the Wyoming night. "I will count the days until you return," Pierce said, holding her close. "I will write every week," Willa promised, "and I will work as fast as I can to complete my dissertation. The sooner I finish, the sooner I can come back. When you return, will you marry me?" Pierce asked quietly. Willa pulled back to look at his face, seeing in his eyes the same love and certainty she felt in her own heart. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Pierce Ashford." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and longing and love. When they finally pulled apart, both had tears on their cheeks. "1 year," Willa said. "I will be back in 1 year." "I will be waiting," Pierce promised. The stage left at dawn. Pierce and Sarah were both there to see her off. Willa hugged Sarah tightly, making her promise to write about her continued recovery. Then she turned to Pierce. They had already said their most important goodbyes, but the moment of final parting was still agonizing. Pierce held her close, his heart beating steadily against her ear. "I love you," he whispered. "That will never change, no matter how far apart we are." "I love you too," Willa replied, "with all my heart." She climbed into the stage, taking a seat by the window. As the driver called to the horses and the stage lurched into motion, Willa kept her eyes on Pierce until he was nothing but a distant figure on the dusty street, and then until even that was lost from sight. The journey back to New York was long and exhausting, but Willa barely noticed. Her mind was full of Pierce, of the life they would build together, of the future stretching before them. She had left a piece of her heart in Wyoming, but she carried with her something even more precious: hope. True to her promise, Willa wrote to Pierce every week. She told him about her progress on her dissertation, about presenting her findings to her committee, about the specimens she continued to analyze. She described New York through new eyes, seeing it now as a temporary waypoint rather than home. Pierce's letters came less frequently, but were no less heartfelt. He wrote about the ranch, about Sarah's complete recovery, about the changing seasons in Wyoming. He wrote about missing her, about the empty space she had left behind, about counting the days until her return. Willa's father noticed the change in his daughter immediately. She worked with renewed focus and energy, driven by her desire to complete her degree and return to Wyoming. When she finally told him about Pierce, he listened quietly, then smiled. "I hoped you would find love someday," he said. "Though I admit I did not expect you to find it in a Wyoming cowboy. But if he makes you happy, if he supports your work and respects your mind, then he has my blessing." "He does all of that and more," Willa said. "He sees me, truly sees me in a way no one else ever has." "Then you are very fortunate indeed," her father said. "And Wyoming is lucky to be gaining such a talented geologist." 7 months after leaving Shoshone City, Willa successfully defended her dissertation. Her committee praised her work, particularly her findings about the ancient marine fossils in the Wyoming rock formations. She had offers from several universities to continue her research, but she turned them all down. She had a different plan. She wrote to Pierce immediately, telling him she would return within the month. His reply came faster than any previous letter, full of joy and anticipation and love. Willa spent her final weeks in New York preparing for the move west. She purchased equipment she would need for continued research, arranged for a small stipend from Vassar to support her work, and said emotional goodbyes to her few close friends. Her father, though sad to see her go, helped her make arrangements and promised to visit once she was settled. The journey west was both familiar and strange. Willa retraced the route she had taken a year earlier, but this time she knew exactly where she was going and why. She was not traveling to study rocks and formations, though she would certainly continue that work. She was traveling toward love, toward a future she had chosen with clear eyes and an open heart. The stage from Cheyenne arrived in Shoshone City on a warm afternoon in late spring. As the town came into view, Willa's heart began to race. She scanned the street, looking for a familiar figure. There, Pierce stood outside the hotel, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on the approaching stage. Beside him was Sarah, beaming with delight. The moment the stage stopped, Willa was out the door and running. Pierce met her halfway, catching her up in his arms and spinning her around. They laughed and cried and held each other, oblivious to the curious stares of other townspeople. "You are back," Pierce said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are really back." "I am home," Willa corrected him. "Because you are my home, Pierce. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." Sarah joined them, hugging Willa tightly. "Welcome home, sister." The word made Willa's eyes sting with happy tears. "Sister," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." They collected Willa's bags and equipment from the stage, loading everything into Pierce's wagon. As they drove out toward the ranch, Willa soaked in the landscape she had missed so much. The red rocks glowed in the afternoon sun, and the wide sky stretched overhead like a promise. At the ranch, everything was exactly as she remembered, yet somehow different. It felt like coming home to a place she had always belonged. Pierce and Sarah had prepared the spare room for her, giving her space to set up a small office for her research. That evening, sitting on the porch with Pierce while Sarah prepared supper, Willa felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. "When should we get married?" Pierce asked, holding her hand in his. "As soon as possible," Willa said. "I have waited long enough." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Shoshone City. Willa wore a new dress of blue silk that matched the Wyoming sky, and Pierce wore his Sunday best, his dark hair neatly combed, his gray-green eyes full of love and wonder. Sarah stood as Willa's witness, and Charlie Winters stood for Pierce. Doc Murphy officiated, his voice wavering with emotion as he pronounced them husband and wife. The small church was full of ranchers and townspeople who had come to respect Willa during her time studying the local geology and to celebrate Pierce's happiness. At the simple reception that followed, Willa met more of the community that would be her new home. She was surprised and touched by how welcoming everyone was, how genuinely pleased they seemed that she had returned. "We need more women like you out here," one rancher's wife told her. "Women with education and backbone who are not afraid of hard work. You are good for this territory." The newlyweds spent their wedding night at the ranch. Sarah had tactfully arranged to stay with a friend in town, giving them privacy. Pierce carried Willa over the threshold, both of them laughing at the romantic tradition. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning the geography of each other's bodies with the same attention Willa gave to her rock formations. It was awkward and wonderful and perfect, a physical expression of the love they had nurtured through letters and longing. Afterward, lying in Pierce's arms with moonlight streaming through the window, Willa felt more complete than she ever had before. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, not just intellectual fulfillment from her work, but emotional and physical connection with another person who understood and cherished her. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Pierce replied, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for choosing this life, for choosing me." "It was the easiest choice I ever made," Willa said truthfully. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Pierce continued working the ranch while Willa established herself as the territory's resident geologist. She consulted on mining operations, helped ranchers find water by studying the underlying rock formations, and continued her research on the ancient geology of the region. She published papers in Eastern scientific journals, gaining recognition for her work while remaining firmly rooted in Wyoming. Her colleagues back east were baffled by her choice to work in such a remote location, but Willa did not care. She had everything she needed: meaningful work, a man she loved deeply, a sister in Sarah, and a community that had embraced her. Her father visited 6 months after the wedding, traveling west despite his advancing age. He spent 2 weeks at the ranch, and Willa watched with joy as he and Pierce developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and their shared love for her. "You have chosen well," her father told her the night before he left. "He is a good man, and this is a good life. I am proud of you, daughter, for having the courage to forge your own path." 2 years after their marriage, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She knew childbirth was dangerous, had lost her own mother to complications. But Doc Murphy was confident, and both Pierce and Sarah were thrilled. Their son was born on a cold December morning in 1886, arriving early but healthy. They named him Thomas, after Pierce's father. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's keen, observant eyes. Holding her son for the first time, Willa understood her own mother in a way she never had before. She understood the fierce, protective love, the willingness to sacrifice anything for this tiny person. And she understood, too, why her mother had encouraged her to pursue her dreams, to not be limited by what others expected of women. "He is perfect," Pierce said, his voice full of wonder as he looked down at his son. "He is ours," Willa replied, "and that made him even more perfect." Sarah was a devoted aunt, helping with Thomas and running the household so that Willa could continue her research work. It was not always easy, balancing motherhood with her scientific pursuits, but Willa was determined to do both. She brought Thomas with her on some of her field expeditions, the baby secure in a specially designed carrier on her back. "You are teaching him young," Pierce teased one day, finding her at a dig site with Thomas babbling happily as she worked. "I want him to grow up knowing that the world is full of wonders waiting to be discovered," Willa said. "And that his mother is more than just someone who keeps house and cooks meals, though I do those things too." Thomas was 18 months old when Sarah announced her own engagement. She had been courting Charlie Winters quietly for over a year, and now he had finally proposed. Willa and Pierce were delighted, throwing a celebration at the ranch that brought together neighbors from miles around. Sarah's wedding was in the spring, a joyous occasion that reminded Willa of her own wedding day. Sarah wore a dress that had belonged to their mother, lovingly altered to fit her smaller frame. She looked beautiful and happy, and Charlie looked like he could not believe his good fortune. After Sarah moved to Charlie's ranch, Willa and Pierce had the house to themselves for the first time since their marriage. It felt strange at first, the absence of Sarah's presence, but also intimate and right. They were a family now, just the three of them with room to grow. 3 years after Thomas's birth, Willa gave birth to twin daughters. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so, but both babies arrived healthy if several weeks early. They named them Caroline, after Pierce's mother, and Helena, after Willa's mother. With 3 young children and a ranch to run, life became hectic. But it was a good kind of hectic, full of laughter and love and the everyday miracles of watching children grow. Pierce proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching his children about the land with the same care his mother had taught him. Willa continued her research, though at a slower pace. She published papers, corresponded with other geologists, and maintained her reputation as an expert on Western geology. When Thomas was 6 and showing a keen interest in rocks and fossils, Willa began teaching him, delighted to have such an eager student. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew tall and serious, with his father's quiet competence and his mother's curiosity. The twins were wild and joyful, more interested in horses than rocks, but equally loved. Sarah and Charlie had children of their own, 2 boys and a girl, and the cousins grew up close despite living on different ranches. The families gathered frequently for meals and celebrations, creating a web of love and support that strengthened them all. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Pierce surprised Willa with a gift, a small building he had constructed near the house, specifically designed as a laboratory and office for her work. "You have sacrificed so much for me, for our family," Pierce said as he showed her around the space. "You deserve a place that is just yours, where you can work without tripping over children's toys or having to clear the dining table." Willa was so moved she could not speak for a moment. She walked through the space, taking in the large windows for natural light, the sturdy tables for her equipment, the shelves he had built for her specimens and books. It was perfect. "Thank you," she finally managed. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." Pierce pulled her close. "You are the most thoughtful person I have ever known, the most brilliant, the most courageous, the most loving. I fall in love with you more deeply every day, Willa Ashford." She kissed him then with all the passion and gratitude and love she felt. Even after 10 years of marriage, the attraction between them had not faded. If anything, it had deepened, enriched by shared experiences and mutual respect. That night, after the children were asleep, they made love with the practiced ease of long familiarity and the continued wonder of genuine connection. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Willa reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Wyoming to study rocks, to advance her scientific career, to prove herself in a field dominated by men. She had found all of that, but she had also found so much more. She had found love with a cowboy who saw her not as unusual or unfeminine, but simply as herself, worthy of respect and devotion. She had found a home in a place she had initially considered just a research site. She had found a community that valued her contributions. and she had found a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined in her years of academic study. "What are you thinking?" Pierce asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I am incredibly fortunate," Willa said. "That coming to Wyoming was the best decision I ever made. That finding you was the greatest discovery of my life." Pierce smiled, that rare, warm smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "I was thinking the same thing. That geologist who came to study rock formations turned out to be the most important discovery of my life. The most precious, the most valuable, the most loved." They held each other as the Wyoming night settled around them, as it had on so many nights before and would on so many nights to come. The Red Rock Canyon stood eternal under the stars, keeping their ancient secrets, recording in stone the slow, inexorable processes that shaped the earth. And in a ranch house beneath those stars, two people who had found each other against all odds continued to build a life together, solid as the rock formations Willa studied, and just as enduring. The children grew, and eventually Thomas did become a geologist like his mother, though he focused on mining engineering rather than pure research. He went east for his education, but he always returned to Wyoming, unable to stay away from the landscape that had shaped him. The twins both married local ranchers and stayed close, giving Willa and Pierce a house full of grandchildren as the years went on. Willa continued her research well into her later years, making significant contributions to the understanding of Western geology. She trained several younger geologists, both men and women, and became known as someone who opened doors for women in science. Universities sought her as a lecturer, but she only rarely traveled east, preferring to remain in Wyoming with Pierce and their ever-growing family. Sarah and Charlie's ranch prospered, and the two families remained close. Doc Murphy, who seemed to live forever, attended the births of all their grandchildren, grumbling about being too old for such work, but always being there when needed. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Pierce and Willa rode out together to Red Canyon, where they had first truly connected. They were older now, grayer, with the lines and scars of decades of hard work and hard living. But they were still strong, still capable, still deeply in love. They stood together at the base of the cliff, where Pierce had saved her from the rattlesnake all those years ago, and Willa remembered the fear and excitement of that day, the moment when their paths had intersected and changed both their lives forever. "You ever regret it?" Pierce asked quietly. "Giving up the life you could have had in New York, the academic career?" Willa turned to him, taking his weathered face in her hands. "Not for one single moment," she said firmly. "This life, our life together, is more than I ever dreamed of." "You are more than I ever dreamed of. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Pierce kissed her, and it was like their first kiss and every kiss in between, familiar and exciting, tender and passionate. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Shall we head home?" Pierce asked. "I believe Sarah is bringing the grandchildren over for supper." "In a moment," Willa said. She turned back to the canyon wall, running her hand over the ancient rock. "I just want to remember this feeling, this moment, the absolute certainty that I am exactly where I am meant to be." They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. The house came into view, lamplight glowing in the windows, welcoming them home. They could hear children's laughter even before they reached the yard, and Willa felt her heart swell with contentment. This was her discovery, more significant than any fossil or rock formation. She had discovered love, deep and abiding. She had discovered home, not just a place but a feeling of belonging. She had discovered that it was possible to have both a brilliant mind and a full heart, to pursue scientific truth and romantic love, to be both a geologist and a wife, a mother, a grandmother. Pierce had been her favorite discovery. Yes, but their life together, the family they had built, the love they had nurtured, the home they had created, that was the discovery that mattered most. And unlike the ancient rocks she studied, this was a discovery that continued to unfold day by day, year by year, as precious and enduring as anything the earth had created over millions of years. As they dismounted and walked hand in hand toward the house full of family and laughter and love, Willa knew with absolute certainty that she had found what every explorer seeks, not just knowledge or understanding, but meaning, purpose, and joy. The geologist had come to study rock formations, but she had found something far more valuable. She had found home,